Welcome to Smackey's Garage. Today we're going to be adding some custom wiring to this sled. We're going to be adding port up here on the front of the sled so that we can add power to this helmet. So this helmet is an oxygen helmet and it has a heated visor and a rear light. In order to get it to work, you need to have power. There's no batteries in this helmet like there was in the old BVS2 that I used to run. So now I need to somehow get power to this helmet. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at, can I make an off-the-shelf part work from BRP? Because a lot of these old sleds, they don't stock the parts anymore that allow you to connect the heated shield. So let's go ahead and look at everything and see what we have to do. Now the sled that we're going to be working on is a 2007 SkiDoo Renegade. So this has the 800 PTEK engine. When you compare this sled to another sled that you're working on, there's a good chance that the power connectors for the helmets are different. So I've looked around to see if I can find the right power connector for this specific sled. And I couldn't find one. So I ended up just buying one that worked. I think it was for a GSX of a similar year that might fit, that might not fit. So we're gonna see how can we get that to work. Luckily, when we look at how it's gonna get installed, it's really just a positive 12 volts that are going to the helmet. So either way, we can just run it to the battery or we can run it to that connector. But first, let's go ahead and see if we can find the connector for this, see if we can make it work. If not, then we're gonna have to figure out some way to modify this, see what makes the most sense. All right, so I'm assuming the connector is gonna be inside of here, so we're gonna have to see if we can find it kind of up in here. So it should be coming off of the wiring that comes off of the dash. So there's already power going up here. There's power coming to the key. There's power coming to a 12 volt supply that I have up here. So it should be on the same loom that I'm looking for. Now looking inside the sled, what I see is a connector that's hanging out right there. Now it looks like it has the right type of blades. So the blades are sideways or horizontal compared to the connector. And it is a red and a black wire. So that has a good chance of being the connector. If you want to look at where this is in relation to everything, you got your brakes, oil, pull start, engine's right behind it. And it's essentially sitting right on top of it. So right there. Now we're gonna have to see how do we make that work if we can. That connector that we have, it has the right blade styles on it. So it does have the horizontal blades, but this is definitely not the right connector for it. So the one that I'm linking in the description does not fit this sled here, but we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna make it work. So for the helmet, it does work with the E-Link system. So I do have this wiring that came with the helmet that connects in. So it is an E-Link connector. So that E-Link connector is essentially just gonna touch right here and then magnetically stick on and power it. On that, there's a cable that's gonna run down your sleeve into the sled. And this is where it plugs in. There's gonna be a E-Link power right here. So this is where you essentially are gonna be selecting what you wanna run. But to make this work, we're gonna have to use that connector that I bought, which is linked in the description below, and we're gonna have to modify it. We can go ahead and we can put some power to it to make sure all this works together and to make sure that it's working correctly. Here's the cable that I purchased. It's already modified, so I ended up cutting this off. So you can see I already took the ground strap here and I put it underneath and I put some heat shrink on it to hold it in place because that's where it essentially needs to go when you put this together on the sled. Now when we put this on the sled, you can see the ring terminal here underneath, we're making contact here. So it's gonna go in between the plastic and here, and then we're gonna go ahead and put this up through the bottom of the sled. After we put it up through and through the plastic, then we're gonna take this and we're gonna screw it on. And this is essentially what's gonna hold it in place. So this is what we're gonna test out right now. Now with this, one of the things I wanna do is to see how much amperage is going through. So we can actually plug this into my power supply to see how much is coming through it. Now this does come fused, I believe, so it's something you should check out, but I added this just in case I ran it from the battery, and I did change a lot of the wiring up here. So you can see here, I think this is actually a fuse that'll break if a problem occurs. So with these two wires, I can go ahead and connect them to my power supply. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna add 12 volts to it, and then we're gonna see if it works on the helmet. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and power this up first. So power supply on, it's running 12 volts, 12.2, lower to 12. And what I wanna do is I wanna cycle this through the different levels of power to see how much it's actually taking on. I wanna see what the current is to make sure I have the right size fuse. So we're gonna go ahead and plug it in. Then a moment of truth. Hey, we have light. All right, so we can see that we do have light on the back of the helmet. We're currently drawing about 7 watts or 12 volts and 0.6 amps. Bring it all the way up. Now that we're all the way up, we're running 12 volts, 1.1 amps, and 14 watts. So I added a 5 amp fuse in this line, so that should be enough for what we're trying to do. So now we get to figure out how to put this on the sled and how to make it work. Now, there's a few different ways that I can approach this, and I think the best way that I can start to approach it is to see if I can actually use that connector to see if it's a always on source or to see if it's source that's switched. Now, I do run a direct from the battery GPS. The issue with it is I need to unplug it every time I stop, because if you don't, it's not on a relay or anything, so it's always powered, it drained the battery. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna check to see if these wires will work, and if they do, we can always remove that connector and solder directly to it. So let's go ahead, I'm gonna go ahead, see if I can pull that out now. All right, with that connector in there, I need to cut this zip tie up top that's holding it up and in place away from the engine, just to try to get a little bit more room out of it so I can pull it towards me if I need to solder it. All right, so I was able to get 2 wires to it, 1 and 2. They're both black, but I know which one's positive, I know which one's negative. I'm running it to here. You see there's no power. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the sled power on. Okay, still no power. So now I guess if we start the sled, there should be power if it's a 12 volt switch source. Well, everything's gonna smell like 2-stroke now, but it's good. So we do have power there. Now, knowing that we have power there, what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna take that wire out, I'm gonna cut it, and I'm gonna splice directly to it. You know, I could do a connector to it, but I really don't need to, since this isn't something I'm gonna be removing that often. And, you know, I don't really take the top piece off to service it. If I ever do, I'll have to cut it, but looks like I should be good to use this. To get better access to this, I'm gonna end up taking this off. So there's only 2 screws. 1 bolt there, 1 bolt there, about 7mm. Okay, now that we have that figured out, we don't need all this cable to run from here to the battery. Now, the reason for this fuse was mainly because, you know, if I was just relying on the fuse that came with it, which is right here, this is pretty close to where it actually plugs in. Now, the issue with having the fuse up here is if I had this long of wire and it did rub down here and there was no fuse, it would essentially start a fire or short something out or cause damage to the sled. So I don't need this fuse since I'm not going to be running it directly to the battery. We're going to be cutting this and shortening this up as soon as we figure out the placement of this. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to place this first on the sled, and then we're going to figure out what length we need. And then we're going to rewire this up so this fuse is completely covered. Now, to figure out what drill bit we're going to use, we're going to just take this, I'm going to measure off the back. Looks like 448. So I'm going to end up drilling it pretty much right above the choke cable. There's plenty of room, plenty of clearance inside here, so I really shouldn't have an issue with it.
All is said and done. I am restricted, fixed upon the web. I need to kick the habit that my mind is breathing in. Break out, I've got to see.
So now I just need to go ahead and splice these wires into this connector here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this connector off, solder some leads to it, and then we'll solder them somewhere here. I might actually take these off too, and just use a smaller gauge wire. Now, one of the things I'm probably going to need to watch out for with this on my sled is just making sure that the wire doesn't get looped around the choke and pull it. The choke's going to be down, so it really shouldn't. So I'm not too worried about it, but it's something I'm going to have to check. You know, if another place I could put it was on the other side, just use a little bit of a longer wire. So with that, we'll see how it does here. Now for the moment of truth. Things wired back up. Plug this on, or plugged in. Helmet is plugged in. So that was actually a pretty easy project. It wasn't too bad to get this in. So there are wires down there that you can use. You just need to check to make sure that they're 12 volt switched so you don't end up kind of running it all the time. Now, most likely, when you look at your sled and you're trying to figure this out, you're gonna have the connector down there for the heated visor for the rear light. You just need to figure out which one it is. And it's really not that big of a deal, as we've shown in this video, that if you do need to cut the connector off and then solder and then put everything back together, you know, you can do it. It's something that's not a hard project to do. Now, one other thing you could do is if you do take your sled apart more often than I do, you could actually put a connector in there so you can disconnect it when you remove this piece. But you know, it's not really that big of a deal, because if I do need to remove it, I can just take this and spin it out and then remove it. So thanks for tuning in this week on Smackey's Garage. I'll see you next time.